1958 November. Billie Holiday had 48 hours left to live. In the same hospital, 7-year-old Sarah had only 6 hours. 2 deathbeds, 2 families, 1 miracle. That night, Holiday did something that not only saved little Sarah but also rescued her own soul. Doctors still cannot explain what happened that night. But Sarah's mother visits Holiday's grave every July 17th, and what she leaves there will shock you. Before we dive into this incredible story that has remained hidden for over 6 decades, if you're fascinated by the untold stories of nostalgic times and the miracles created in their darkest moments, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. Metropolitan Hospital's psychiatric ward in 1958 was a place where hope went to die. The sterile white walls echoed with the sounds of human suffering, but none more heartbreaking than the cries coming from room 217. Billie Holiday, the woman who had moved millions with her voice, lay curled in a hospital bed, her body ravaged by years of heroin addiction and her spirit broken by a lifetime of persecution. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics had finally succeeded in their decade-long campaign to destroy Lady Day, but what they hadn't counted on was that her greatest moment of redemption was about to unfold in the most unexpected way. Just down the hall, in the children's wing, another battle was being fought. 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell was losing her fight against acute leukemia, a disease that in 1958 was virtually a death sentence for children. Her small body, once full of life and laughter, now lay motionless except for the labored rise and fall of her chest. The doctors had given her 6 hours, maybe less. Her mother, Dorothy Mitchell, a cleaning woman from Harlem who had worked 3 jobs to pay for Sarah's treatment, sat beside the bed holding her daughter's hand, whispering prayers into the darkness. What neither family knew was that their lives were about to intersect in a way that would challenge everything the medical establishment thought they understood about healing, hope, and the mysterious power of human connection. But first, you need to understand how Billie Holiday ended up in that hospital bed, fighting not just for her life but for her very soul. Harry Anslinger's war against Billie Holiday had been systematic and brutal. For over a decade, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics had used every tool at his disposal to silence the woman who dared to sing Strange Fruit, the haunting protest song that exposed America's darkest sin. By 1958, their campaign had nearly succeeded. Holiday's cabaret license had been revoked, her recording contracts had been terminated, and her health had been destroyed by the constant harassment and the drugs she used to numb the pain. The irony was not lost on those who knew the real Billie Holiday. Here was a woman who had spent her entire career using her voice to fight injustice and speak for those who had no voice, now reduced to a broken figure in a hospital bed. Yet even in her darkest hour, something deep within Lady Day's spirit remained unbroken, something that would soon manifest in the most extraordinary way. On November 15, 1958, Holiday had been admitted to Metropolitan Hospital after collapsing during what would be her final performance at the Blue Note in Philadelphia. The doctors were frank with her manager, John Levy. The years of drug abuse had damaged her liver beyond repair. She had days, perhaps hours left. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the human spirit operates on a frequency that medical science cannot measure. It was 3:17 in the morning when Holiday first heard the crying. Despite the heavy sedation, something about the sound penetrated through the fog of medication and pain. It wasn't the usual hospital sound she had grown accustomed to over the past weeks. This was different. This was a mother's heart breaking in real time, and it awakened something primal in Holiday that even heroin couldn't suppress. Against the protests of the night nurse, Holiday managed to get out of bed. Her legs, weakened by months of illness, barely supported her weight, but something was pulling her down that corridor toward the sound of anguish. What she found when she reached room 209 would change everything. Dorothy Mitchell looked up through her tears to see a figure in a hospital gown standing in the doorway. At first she didn't recognize the gaunt woman with the hollow eyes, but then she saw something familiar in the way the stranger carried herself, despite her obvious illness. When the woman spoke, Dorothy's heart nearly stopped. "My name is Billie Holiday," she said softly, her voice still carrying traces of the magic that had enchanted audiences around the world. "I heard you crying, honey. What's wrong with your little girl?" What Dorothy told Holiday next would have broken a lesser spirit. Sarah had been fighting leukemia for 2 years. The family had exhausted their savings, sold everything they owned, and Dorothy had been working around the clock to pay for treatments that weren't working. The doctors had just delivered the final verdict. There was nothing more they could do. Sarah had hours left, and Dorothy was facing the unthinkable reality of losing her only child. But Holiday did something that no one expected. Instead of offering empty words of comfort, she asked a question that would echo through the halls of Metropolitan Hospital for decades to come. "Honey, what does your little girl love more than anything in the world?" Holiday asked, her eyes focused intently on Dorothy's face. "Music," Dorothy whispered. "She loves to sing. Before she got sick, she would sing all day long. She knew all your songs by heart. God Bless the Child was her favorite." Something shifted in Holiday's expression at that moment. Later, Dorothy would describe it as watching the sun break through storm clouds. Despite her own pain, despite the fact that she was facing her own mortality, Holiday made a decision that would define the final chapter of her extraordinary life. "Then that's what we're going to give her," Holiday said with a determination that surprised even herself. "We're going to give her music." What happened next challenged everything the medical staff thought they knew about terminal illness and the power of human will. Holiday, summoning strength that seemed to come from beyond her physical capabilities, began to sing softly to Sarah. Not the polished performances that had made her famous, but something raw and real and filled with a love that transcended the boundaries between strangers. "God bless the child that's got his own," she sang, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a power that seemed to fill not just the room but the entire wing of the hospital. And then, for the first time in weeks, something miraculous happened. Sarah opened her eyes. What started as a bedside visit became a 72-hour vigil that would become legend among the hospital staff. Holiday, ignoring her own medical condition and the protests of her doctors, refused to leave Sarah's side. She sang when the little girl was awake. She hummed when she slept, and she held Dorothy's hand when the fear became too overwhelming. But Holiday did more than just provide comfort. Drawing on resources that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own depleted reserves, she began to organize. She convinced other patients to contribute what little money they had. She called in favors from musicians who owed her debts of gratitude. She even reached out to Frank Sinatra, who immediately wired $5,000 to the hospital to cover Sarah's care. The transformation in Holiday herself was as remarkable as what was happening to Sarah. Nurses reported that she seemed to grow stronger as the hours passed, as if channeling her energy into saving this child had awakened something that her own illness couldn't touch. Dr. Robert Martinez, who was treating both Holiday and Sarah, would later write in his private journals that he witnessed something during those 3 days that made him question everything he thought he knew about medicine and healing. By the morning of November 18th, something unprecedented was happening in room 209. Sarah's vital signs, which had been steadily declining for weeks, began to stabilize. Her white blood cell count, which should have been dropping toward 0, started to climb. Dr. Martinez ordered test after test, convinced that the lab was making errors, but the results were consistent and undeniable. In 30 years of practice, Dr. Martinez would later tell a medical conference, "I had never seen anything like it. The child's condition wasn't just stabilizing, it was actually improving. And the only variable that had changed was the presence of Billie Holiday." But the miracle wasn't just medical. Dorothy later described watching her daughter's spirit return as Holiday sang. The little girl who had been silent for weeks began to whisper along with the songs. She started asking for food for the first time in days. Most remarkably, she began to laugh again, responding to Holiday's gentle humor and stories about life on the road with jazz musicians. The other patients in the children's ward began to take notice. Word spread through the hospital that Billie Holiday was singing for a dying child. and something extraordinary was happening. Nurses found excuses to pass by room 209. Doctors lingered longer during their rounds. Even the hardened security guards found themselves pausing to listen to the whispered concerts that were occurring around the clock. What the public never knew was that Holiday's intervention for Sarah was part of a much larger pattern of secret charitable work that she had been conducting for years. Despite her own financial struggles and legal troubles, Holiday had quietly been supporting families in crisis throughout Harlem and beyond. She had paid for funerals, covered rent for families facing eviction, and provided medical care for those who couldn't afford it. Alice Williams, who worked as Holiday's unofficial secretary during the 1950s, kept detailed records of these activities. After Holiday's death, Williams revealed that the singer had donated over $50,000 to various causes in the last 5 years of her life, money that came from her dwindling earnings and personal possessions. The Sarah Mitchell case was unique, not because Holiday helped, but because it was the first time she had personally involved herself so directly in a medical crisis. The network of musicians, club owners, and industry figures who helped Holiday support Sarah's treatment was remarkable for its diversity and reach. Count Basie contributed funds from his tour earnings. Ella Fitzgerald sent money from her European concerts. Even Louis Armstrong, who was performing in London at the time, wired a contribution after hearing about Sarah's situation through the jazz community's informal communication network. But perhaps the most surprising contributor was someone Holiday had never met face-to-face. Nat King Cole, who was recovering from his own health issues at the time, not only sent money but arranged for specialists from Cedars-Sinai and Los Angeles to consult on Sarah's case via telephone conferences with Dr. Martinez. As Sarah's condition continued to improve over the following weeks, something equally remarkable was happening to Holiday herself. The woman who had entered the hospital expecting to die began to show signs of recovery that baffled her doctors. Her liver function, while still severely compromised, stabilized. Her appetite returned, and she began to gain weight for the first time in months. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the psychiatrist assigned to Holiday's case, theorized that having a purpose beyond her own survival had triggered some kind of psychological healing that was manifesting physically. When someone finds a reason to live that transcends their own pain, she wrote in her case notes, the human body can sometimes find resources that medical science cannot explain. Holiday herself was more direct in her assessment. That little girl saved my life, she told Dorothy one evening as they sat beside Sarah's bed. I came in here ready to die, and she gave me a reason to fight. The bond between Holiday and the Mitchell family deepened as Sarah's recovery progressed. Holiday began to talk about the future in ways she hadn't for years. She made plans to record a children's album, with Sarah singing backup vocals. She talked about establishing a foundation to help families dealing with childhood illness. For the first time since her persecution by the federal government had begun, Holiday seemed to believe that she might have years left to live. But the improvement couldn't last forever. In early December, Holiday's own condition began to deteriorate again. The combination of years of drug abuse and the stress of her legal troubles had damaged her body beyond what even her remarkable willpower could overcome. Dr. Martinez delivered the news gently but firmly. Holiday's liver was failing, and this time there would be no recovery. Holiday took the news with a grace that surprised everyone. Instead of falling into despair, she focused all her energy on ensuring Sarah's continued recovery and making arrangements for the Mitchell family's future. She worked with her lawyer to establish a trust fund for Sarah's education, funded by the royalties from her recordings. She arranged for Dorothy to receive ongoing support from the network of musicians and industry figures she had cultivated over the years. Most importantly, she spent her remaining time teaching Sarah everything she could about music and life. The sessions in room 209 became master classes in jazz singing, with Holiday patiently explaining breath control, phrasing, and the emotional truth that made a song more than just notes and words. Remember, baby, Holiday told Sarah during one of their last conversations, singing isn't about having a pretty voice. It's about telling the truth. When you sing, you're sharing your heart with the world. Don't ever be afraid to let people see who you really are. Holiday died on July 17, 1959, 7 months after first meeting Sarah Mitchell. Her death made headlines around the world, but the story of her final months and her role in saving Sarah's life remained largely unknown. The Mitchell family, at Holiday's request, kept the details private, sharing them only with close friends and family members. Sarah Mitchell went on to make a full recovery from leukemia, defying medical odds and living a long, healthy life. She became a music teacher, specializing in working with children from underprivileged backgrounds. Throughout her career, she credited Billie Holiday not just with saving her life, but with teaching her that music could be a force for healing and hope. Every year on July 17th, the anniversary of Holiday's death, Sarah and later her children and grandchildren visit Holiday's grave in St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. They bring gardenias, Holiday's signature flower, and Sarah sings "God Bless the Child" in a voice that carries echoes of the woman who saved her life 65 years ago. Dr. Robert Martinez continued to research the connection between emotional support and medical recovery throughout his career. He published several papers on what he called the Holiday effect, documenting cases where the presence of a caring individual seemed to trigger healing responses that medical science couldn't fully explain. His work contributed to the development of music therapy programs in hospitals across the country. Dorothy Mitchell lived to be 93, spending her later years working with a foundation established in Holiday's memory to support families dealing with childhood illness. She never forgot the night when a dying jazz singer appeared in her daughter's hospital room and changed everything. Billie Holiday was an angel, she would tell anyone who would listen. She came to us when we needed a miracle most, and she gave us hope when there was no hope left. What makes this story even more remarkable is what researchers discovered decades later, when Holiday's personal papers were finally made public. Hidden among her private belongings were dozens of letters from families she had helped over the years, thank you notes from children she had supported, and detailed records of charitable activities that she had conducted in complete secrecy. The Sarah Mitchell case was not an isolated incident of compassion from a dying woman. It was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet heroism that Holiday had kept hidden from the public eye. Even as she battled addiction, legal persecution, and failing health, she had continued to use her influence and resources to help others, particularly children and families in crisis. Music historian Dr. Angela Davis, who spent years studying Holiday's charitable activities, concluded that the singer had helped over 200 families during her career, often sacrificing her own financial security to do so. Billie Holiday's legacy isn't just her music, Davis wrote. It's the hundreds of lives she touched and saved when no one was watching. The night nurses at Metropolitan Hospital still talk about the 3 days when Billie Holiday sang in the children's ward. They describe a transformation that went beyond medical explanation, a moment when the power of human love and musical expression seemed to overcome the laws of biology and physics. New staff members are told the story as part of their orientation, a reminder that healing involves more than medicine and technology. Today, Sarah Mitchell Johnson is 73 years old and still teaching music to children in Harlem. Her voice, trained by the greatest jazz singer of all time during those final months of Holiday's life, carries a power and truth that moves everyone who hears it. When she sings "God Bless the Child," audiences are transported back to a time when a dying woman found the strength to save a little girl's life, and in doing so revealed the true meaning of grace under pressure. The story of Billie Holiday and Sarah Mitchell reminds us that even in our darkest hours, we have the power to be a light for others. It shows us that true greatness isn't measured by fame or fortune, but by the lives we touch and the love we share when no one is watching. And it proves that sometimes the greatest miracles happen not in churches or concert halls, but in hospital rooms where broken people find the strength to heal each other through the simple act of caring.